150 years, just let that number sink in. 1.5 centuries of silence, oblivion, and museum dust. An entire epoch during which a royal tiara, crafted for a great ruler, transformed into a ghost, an exhibit stripped of its story, gazed upon but never truly seen. Then, one evening, Queen Mary steps into the spotlight, shattering that 150-year silence. But what if this isn't merely an homage to history? What if this gesture conceals a secret, one the palace walls have guarded for far too long? Today, we'll try to unravel why this treasure was forgotten for so long, and what its sudden, triumphant return truly signifies. Picture Europe at the dawn of the 19th century. The tumultuous winds of the Napoleonic Wars had just settled, giving way to a new cultural renaissance, replacing imperial pomp with intellectual vigor. This was the age of Romanticism and Neoclassicism, a time when high society found itself utterly captivated by antiquity. Recent excavations in Pompeii and Herculaneum ignited imaginations, and the journey to Italy, the famed Grand Tour, became an essential rite of passage for every educated aristocratic family. Fashion responded instantly. Voluminous crinolines gave way to ethereal empire-style gowns, and the art of jewelry saw the rise of a fervent cult of cameos, those miniature sculptures carved from stone as if plucked directly from ancient Rome. It was into this very atmosphere that the future King Christian VIII of Denmark and his wife, Caroline Amalie, immersed themselves when they embarked on an extended journey through Italy in the year 1819. This was no mere trip. It was a veritable pilgrimage to the wellsprings of European civilization. They visited ruins, museums, and the workshops of artists and stone carvers alike. Christian, a man of refined taste and a passionate collector, didn't merely admire these antiquities. He acquired them. He purchased antique cameos and intaglios, commissioned new ones from Rome's most celebrated artisans, perceiving them not simply as souvenirs, but as time capsules, tangible embodiments of a magnificent history. It was from this passion that the concept for the tiara was born. It wasn't commissioned from a renowned Parisian jeweler as a mere symbol of power. No, its genesis was far more personal, far more romantic. It was a gift from a husband to his wife, assembled quite literally, piece by piece, from their shared memories. Each of the 11 cameos wasn't just a stone. It was a frozen moment from their Italian journey, an echo of the shared admiration that bound them together. The jeweler's task, his name alas lost to history, was incredibly complex, not merely to create a setting, but to unite these disparate fragments into a single, harmonious masterpiece. The very concept of this particular piece was revolutionary for its era. In an age when a queen's status was measured by the carats of her diamonds and the heft of her family parures, Caroline Amalie was intended to wear a tiara for what we would now call everyday use. This was an intellectual adornment, a declaration of taste, not of wealth. It wasn't meant to dazzle with sparkle at state receptions. Its mission was different, to grace the queen in more intimate salon settings, highlighting her erudition and refinement, her profound connection to the grand culture of the past. The intricately carved gold, reminiscent of ancient patterns, became the perfect frame for this collection of memories. It didn't compete with the cameos, but rather delicately accentuated their beauty, like the pages of a precious album. And so, around the year 1820, what emerged wasn't merely a piece of jewelry, but a wearable diary, an ode to love and art, crafted from the fragments of the great Roman Empire for the future Queen of Denmark. A masterpiece too personal to ever become a public symbol, destined to fade into 1.5 centuries of silence. Let's momentarily set aside its royal status and view this tiara as a jeweler or artist would. The first thing that strikes you is its warmth. Unlike the cool, aristocratic haughtiness of diamonds, it doesn't strive to blind you with icy flashes. On the contrary, it seems to glow from within with the soft, honeyed light of matte gold. This is a piece of jewelry that doesn't scream its splendor. It invites conversation, a careful examination, promising to tell its story to anyone willing to listen. Its form, a classic bandeau, an elegant arc perfectly tracing the line of the head, speaks of comfort and grace, not a ponderous display of power. The foundation of it all is the gold. But this isn't simply smooth, polished metal. It's an intricate work of chasing and carving, executed with incredible skill. Look closely at the details. The setting of each cameo is a virtuosic ornament, inspired by ancient friezes. Here you can discern the most delicate palmettes, acanthus scrolls, and garlands that seem to entwine the precious stones like living plants. The jeweler didn't just create nests for the cameos, they constructed an entire architectural scene for them, a miniature temple where every detail is subordinate to the overall harmony. This work demanded not only a steady hand, but also a profound understanding of classical art. And now we arrive at the heart of the treasure, the 11 cameos. These aren't just semi-precious stones, they are a gallery of ancient portraits and narratives carved into layered agate or sardonyx. The masters of that era masterfully utilized the stone's natural patterns to create a three-dimensional image. The milky white upper layer would become the raised profile of a goddess or hero, while the darker lower layer provided the ideal contrasting background. One can only guess who exactly is depicted in these miniatures. Perhaps the wise Minerva, patroness of the arts, or Apollo, or the Muses, inspiring creativity. Each cameo is a frozen scene from a myth, a tiny sculpture preserving the warmth of a Roman carver's hands. Now imagine you could touch it. The ornament would feel unexpectedly weighty, the pleasant heft of real gold filling your palm. Your fingers would sense the difference in textures, the warm, slightly rough gold from the carving, and the cool, perfectly smooth, almost centuries-polished surface of the stones. This tactile sensation heightens the feeling of authenticity, a connection to the past. You can almost physically feel history flowing from this object into your hands. Even the sound of the tiara settling onto a velvet cushion would be deep and noble, devoid of the tinkling lightness of lesser trinkets. Compositionally, the tiara is flawless. The 11 cameos are arranged in strict symmetrical order, creating a visual rhythm that guides the eye from one narrative to the next. The central cameo, likely the largest, serves as the conceptual anchor for the entire structure, while the others, diminishing towards the edges, create a sense of completeness and elegance. This isn't a chaotic collection of souvenirs, but a meticulously planned ensemble where every detail, every golden scroll serves a single purpose: to create a work of art that is both personal and universal. It is in this combination that the main secret of its charm lies. Queen Caroline Amalie's tiara isn't merely an ornament, it's an encrypted message. Through the language of classical art, it speaks of its owner's education, refined taste, and deep connection to Europe's great cultural heritage. It was a kind of intellectual code, comprehensible only to the select circle of aristocracy of that time. To wear such a tiara was to declare oneself not as the wealthiest, but as one of the most enlightened women of her era. And so the moment arrived, a moment it seemed all of Denmark had been waiting for: the coronation. Grand balls, state receptions, visits from foreign monarchs. The palace halls buzzed with anticipation, the air electric with the rustle of silk and the soft clink of orders and medals. Everyone awaited a dazzling display of the Danish crown's power and wealth. It was the perfect script, the ideal stage for the triumphant debut of the Cameo tiara, this intellectual treasure born of love and art. Journalists and court ladies surely had their enthusiastic descriptions of this unusual adornment already drafted. But on that evening, and on every one thereafter, the Cameo tiara never left its velvet cradle. In official portraits and chronicles of social events, we see Queen Caroline Amalie, but her brow is adorned with entirely different jewels. Here she is in the famous emerald parure, commissioned by her own hand, majestic, undeniable, speaking the language of power. Here she is bedecked in cascades of diamonds and heavy strands of pearls, classic symbols of royal status. But the Cameo tiara, her personal talisman, her Italian memory, remained behind the scenes of this theatre of splendor. Why? It wasn't an act of betrayal or forgetfulness. It was a conscious choice of role. Upon becoming queen, Caroline Amalie understood that her personal passions and her public image were not always one and the same. The Cameo tiara was her private dialogue with history, with art, with her beloved husband. But for a dialogue with ambassadors and ministers, for affirming the monarchy's legitimacy, a different language was required, the universal and universally understood language of diamonds and emeralds. Her refined adornment was too intimate, too intricate for the rough and tumble political arena. It spoke in whispers, and the throne demanded thunderous declarations. The reaction of contemporaries was predictable. There simply was none. No one could mourn what they had never seen. Society received what it expected. The Queen's image was impeccable, her jewels matching her status. No one, save for the very closest circle of confidants, even suspected the existence of another treasure kept in her private chambers. Its public absence caused not a single question, not a single whisper in court circles. Thus, this tiara's first triumph proved a paradox. It was a triumph of silence, a triumph of the personal over the public. It did not become a legend in the brilliance of ballrooms, but instead found a completely different destiny. This unfulfilled debut determined its future. By refusing to become part of the official treasury, it remained in the status of personal property, a family heirloom. And this status, while preserving its uniqueness, simultaneously condemned it to a long, 150-year journey into the shadows, into the quiet of museum vaults. Its story began not with applause, but with silence. Paradoxically, this tiara's golden age was an age of silence. Its main icon became the woman who never wore it in public. Queen Caroline Amalie, the owner of this treasure, went down in history as a fashion setter, but her calling card was an entirely different set of jewels. Emeralds, diamonds, rubies, these were the gems that resonated throughout Europe, adorning her in official portraits. The Cameo tiara remained her private secret, an almost intimate detail of her biography, known only to a precious few. But absence from the public eye didn't mean an absence of love. We can say with certainty that for the Queen, this ornament was more than just an accessory. It wasn't a crown, it was a relic. Each time she opened the jewelry box, she saw not merely gold and stones, but frozen memories of the happiest time of her life, of her journey through Italy with her beloved husband, when they were not yet monarchs, but simply two people in love with each other and with art. This tiara was her personal talisman, an anchor that held her connection to the past, to the version of herself free from the burden of the crown. After Caroline Amalie's death in 1881, the tiara was neither sold nor placed in the state treasury. It continued its quiet journey within the family. It appears to have been inherited by the Queen's niece, the celebrated Queen Louise, famously known as the mother-in-law of Europe for her matrimonial diplomacy. Louise was a woman of immense influence and an equally vast collection of jewels. Yet even she, possessing impeccable taste, for some reason chose not to wear her aunt's tiara. Perhaps she deemed its style too outdated for the new era, or perhaps she regarded it with reverence, as a memorial piece not intended for unfamiliar eyes. Thus, the ghost tiara passed from generation to generation, from one royal jewelry box to another. It witnessed the changing of eras, the birth and fading of fashion trends, yet remained untouched, like a sleeping beauty from a fairy tale. Its invisibility became its calling card. It transformed into a legend for the initiated, for historians, jewelers, and custodians of royal collections. They knew of its existence, saw it on inventory lists, but to the world, it simply wasn't there. It was a secret treasure, a silent witness whose story grew richer with each decade of oblivion. This long slumber, ironically, saved it. While many historical jewels were ruthlessly dismantled, refashioned to suit new trends, or lost their original stones, The Cameo tiara remained untouched. No one improved it, no one modernized it. It has reached us in its pristine state, preserving not only every golden scroll, but also the very spirit of its era, the vision of its creators, and the warmth of its first owner's hands. Its golden age concluded not with the departure of an icon, but with a change in status. At some point, it moved from a personal jewelry box to a museum display case at Amalienborg Palace. From a personal relic, it became an exhibit. But even there, in plain sight, it remained in the shadows, unnoticed by most visitors who hurried past to more glittering and famous jewels. This was the final stage of its long sleep, the calm before the storm that would erupt 1.5 centuries later. It is here, in the history of this tiara, that we encounter a deafening silence where we might expect loud scandals. Where are the curses, the thefts, the fatal passions that so often envelop royal jewels? Where are the stories of heirs squabbling over it or aristocrats being ruined? The truth is, this tiara's dark side isn't about blood or betrayal. Its mystery is far more subtle and psychological. It's the mystery of oblivion. And the central question is, was this oblivion accidental? The first rumor, and arguably the most plausible explanation, points to a scandal of taste. Imagine the latter half of the 19th century, the heart of the Victorian era. Fashion had undergone a seismic shift. The delicate grace of antiquity gave way to heavy, opulent gowns, accompanied by massive, dazzling jewels. Jewelry artistry now spoke in the language of diamond rivers and colossal crowns. Against this backdrop, an elegant, intellectually refined cameo tiara might have seemed utterly antiquated, too modest, too academic. Perhaps, for subsequent generations of queens, it was simply irrelevant, much like a great-grandmother's antique gown, precious but utterly unwearable. But there's another, more profound theory, one that historians quietly murmur. What if the issue wasn't fashion, but reverence? The tiara was such an intensely personal gift, so intrinsically linked to Caroline Amalie and her love story, that subsequent owners simply hesitated to wear it. To do so would have been akin to trespassing into someone else's deeply intimate space. Donning this tiara, Queen Louise or other heiresses might have felt as though they weren't just trying on a piece of jewelry, but rather someone else's memories. Perhaps an unspoken prohibition settled upon it, born from a profound respect for the memory of its first wearer. Of course, whenever a forgotten treasure is involved, myths of curses inevitably arise. Was the tiara unlucky? Did it bring sorrow to its owner? There isn't a single shred of documented evidence to support such claims. Caroline Amalie's life wasn't without its shadows, but to connect her personal tragedies to this piece of jewelry is nothing more than a beautiful Gothic fantasy. Far more probable is that its true curse lay in its sheer uniqueness. It was so exceptionally special and personal that it became a thing unto itself, an artifact untouchable by others. Thus, we see that the scandals surrounding this tiara weren't tempestuous events, but rather quiet processes. It was the ruthless judgment of fashion, the delicate sensibility of its heirs, and perhaps the profound weight of a personal history that transformed a piece of jewelry into a memorial. There was no dramatic crime, but the quietest one of all was committed: oblivion. The tiara wasn't lost or stolen. It was carefully placed in a casket and left there for 1.5 centuries, transforming from a treasure into a phantom whose story was yet to be rediscovered. The end of an era for this tiara arrived silently, without the tap of an auctioneer's gavel and without heartbreaking farewell scenes. There was no bidding frenzy in Geneva, no worldwide collectors battling for the right to possess this treasure. Nor was there a dramatic theft that would have cemented its legend in the criminal underworld. Its transition to a new state occurred quietly, almost bureaucratically, yet it was no less definitive. The era when the tiara was a personal item, albeit a forgotten one, concluded the moment it was placed under museum glass. This happened at Amalienborg Palace, From the dark depths of the royal treasury, where it had been part of a living, if dormant, collection, it was moved into the light of the exhibition hall. This move was dictated by the logic of heritage preservation. The tiara was deemed too valuable a historical artifact to risk its preservation in private hands. But along with its security, it lost its soul. From an object that could potentially be worn, it transformed into an exhibit meant only for viewing. Envision the scene. A museum curator in crisp white gloves carefully extracts it from the antique casket where it had reposed for decades. For the last time, it feels the touch of human hands before taking its place on a faceless velvet stand behind bulletproof glass. The glare of spotlights replaced the flickering glow of candles. The eager or indifferent gazes of tourists superseded its potential reflection in its owner's eyes. It was an honorable exile, a golden cage. It was then, in the hushed museum hall, that its life in the shadows began. It was on display, yet remained unseen. For most visitors, it was just one of many golden artifacts stripped of context and history. A small plaque nearby likely stated dryly, "Tiara, gold, cameos, early 19th century." No mention of love, of Italy, of a triumph that never fully materialized. It became a flat image, an object for study, having lost its magic and its true purpose. Thus ended its first life, the life of a personal adornment. The era of Caroline Amalie and her heiresses faded into oblivion. The tiara outlived them all, but the price of that longevity was high. It ceased to be a living part of history and transformed into a frozen fragment. No one then could have imagined that this wasn't the end, but merely a very long pause. That one day, a woman would be found who would dare to shatter the glass of this invisible dungeon and return to the treasure not only its brilliance, but also its voice. And so, after 1.5 centuries of silence, the climax arrives. The setting, Helsinki, the presidential palace, a state banquet honoring the visit of Danish monarchs. An evening watched with bated breath by global media, historians, and jewelry connoisseurs alike. The doors swing open, and into the hall glides Queen Mary. In the first moments, cameras focus on her gown, her smile, but then comes a collective gasp that echoes through every royal forum and blog worldwide. Perched on the Queen's head, she shines. The ghost tiara, a treasure everyone knew from museum photographs, but which no one had ever hoped to see on a living person. The phantom of Amalienborg Palace had returned to the world of the living. This wasn't merely a public appearance. It was a meticulously orchestrated historical act. Queen Mary didn't just pick a piece of jewelry from a box. She walked into the museum, mentally shattered the display case's glass, retrieved the exhibit, and restored its true purpose. She dared to break a 150-year-old taboo born either of fashion or reverence. This gesture was a declaration. History should not gather dust on shelves. It must live, breathe, and continue. That evening, Queen Mary became not just a monarch. She became a restorer, giving voice back to a long-silenced artifact. It was at this precise moment that the most significant event occurred. A new interpretation of the tiara was born. If for Caroline Amalie, it was a personal, intimate ornament reflecting her refined taste and memories, for Queen Mary it became a powerful public statement. By wearing it, she drew an invisible thread through the centuries, directly connecting herself to the progenitor of the Danish royal treasury. She showed the world that modern monarchy is not only about glamour and tradition, but also about the deep, meaningful preservation of a nation's cultural code. The tiara transformed from an antique curio into a symbol of continuity. The world reacted instantly. Photographs plastered every publication. Experts vied to comment on the Queen's boldness and impeccable taste. This appearance became a sensation not because the tiara was the most expensive or the most dazzling. It became a sensation because it was the smartest. Queen Mary demonstrated a masterclass in jewelry diplomacy, using a forgotten object to tell the story of her country and her dynasty louder than any political speech. That evening in Helsinki, the tiara reached the peak of its value. And we're not talking about money. Its historical and cultural worth skyrocketed. 1.5 centuries of oblivion ceased to be its flaw and became its greatest virtue, its unique legend. Queen Mary's appearance was the final chord that transformed an ancient piece of jewelry into an immortal masterpiece. She didn't just wear the tiara, she wore its entire 150-year history of silence, and that silence resonated deafeningly loud. After that triumphant evening in Helsinki, the tiara's path did not lead back to the quietude of Amalienborg Palace, nor to the dusty oblivion of a museum vault. Its final, most honorable resting place awaited, the royal treasury beneath Rosenborg Castle. This is more than just a museum, it is the beating heart of the Danish monarchy, a sanctuary for the principal symbols of power and history, the coronation regalia, legendary parures, and jewels that have witnessed the birth and demise of dynasties. Now, the Cameo tiara was destined to take its rightful place among them. This decision was not merely logistical, it was an official canonization. By transferring the tiara to Rosenborg, the Danish royal house forever changed its status. From a personal item, however historical, and from a museum exhibit, however valuable, it transformed into an integral part of the national heritage. From this point forward, it belongs not to one family, but to the entire Danish nation, and its primary task is not to adorn the monarch, but to tell a story to everyone who comes to see it. It ceased to be an accessory and became a document of an era carved in gold and stone. What is its worth? Yes, it contains gold, whose price fluctuates on the market. Yes, its cameos are rare examples of early 19th century glyptics possessing collectible value, but its true worth cannot be calculated in carats or currency. It is composed of intangible assets, its impeccable provenance tracing back to Queen Caroline Amalie, the romantic story of its creation, its unique fate, 150 years of oblivion, and finally, its triumphant return to the world stage thanks to Queen Mary. Its price is 1.5 centuries of silence, multiplied by one evening of dazzling triumph. Now, any visitor to Rosenborg Castle can approach its display case and meet its gaze. In the subdued light of the treasury, its gold seems even warmer, and the antique profiles on the cameos even more enigmatic. And in that moment, a miracle occurs. You are not just looking at an old object. You are looking at the physical embodiment of history, an item that witnessed the turning of eras and has finally found eternal peace, becoming the guardian of its own legend. At the very beginning of our story, we asked, why was this treasure forgotten, and what does its return truly signify? Now, having traversed the entirety of its history, we can provide an answer. Queen Caroline Amalie's tiara was forgotten not due to a curse or a scandal. It was forgotten because of its exceptional nature. It was too personal, too intellectual, too filled with quiet memories to participate in the loud parade of power. It was hidden away not by ill will, but by the delicate sensibilities of descendants and the relentless march of fashion. And its return, crowning Queen Mary, is not merely a beautiful gesture. It is a powerful cultural manifesto. It signifies that history is not a dead weight, but a living spring from which one can and should draw. That continuity is not blind imitation, but a creative dialogue with the past. By wearing this tiara, Queen Mary did not simply adorn herself. She completed a 1.5 century-long story, placing not a period, but an ellipsis, proving that even a museum exhibit can embark on a new life. This tiara is the perfect physical embodiment of human sentiments carried through time. In it resides the passionate love of a collector and the tenderness of a husband who gifted his wife memories in gold. In it, there is the quiet reverence of heirs who dared not touch another's sacred relic. And finally, in it lies the wisdom of a modern queen who saw in a forgotten object not an antique, but a key to understanding her own role and the mission of monarchy in the 21st century. It began its journey as a jeweled diary, then became a silent exhibit in a golden cage, only to ultimately transform into a symbol that speaks to the entire world. Its story imparts a simple but crucial lesson. The true value of a treasure is measured not only by the weight of its stones, but also by the weight of its silence and the depth of its legend. Each year spent in Oblivion only added to its worth, amassing the historical energy that was unleashed on one brilliant evening. The Tiara's journey from a private casket to the nation's premier treasury is now complete. It no longer awaits its owner. Now it awaits us, the viewers, the listeners, the connoisseurs, to tell its astonishing story again and again. It is proof that the greatest treasures speak not with their sparkle, but with their stories. And the loudest of those stories sometimes begin with a very, very long silence.